think we could start. We could get started with prayers. So, as usual, while we're reciting the prayers, imagine the Buddha in the space in front of you. If it's difficult to visualize, to have a clear, detailed visualization of the Buddha, don't worry about that. Try to at least feel the Buddha's presence, because the Buddha is present with us all the time, wherever we are, radiating his excellent qualities of compassion and love and wisdom. And he's completely dedicated to taking care of us, helping us, guiding us in our spiritual practice, our spiritual life, so that we can become free of suffering and its causes and achieve real peace and happiness in their causes. And he'll be with us as long as it takes until we have reached full enlightenment, at the state the Buddha himself has attained. So I really try to feel Buddha has our back. The Buddha is there for us every minute, every second. And if you can, imagine all other sentient beings around you, taking refuge along with you, receiving the benefit of this practice, these prayers along with you. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently, I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayami. So while reciting the mantra of the Buddha, Imagine light flowing from the Buddha into yourself and all the other beings around you and all throughout the universe. The light fills our bodies and minds, purifying negative karma and afflictions, all the causes of suffering. And it nourishes our positive potential, all the good qualities that we have in our mind, like compassion and love and wisdom, so that they can grow, increase, become more and more pure, and eventually become enlightened qualities, so that we attain all the same knowledge, qualities, and realizations as the Buddha. Taya ta om mune mune maha munaye soha. 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 Taya ta om mune maha munaye soha. Taya ta om mune mune maha munaye soha. Take a few moments to regenerate the bodhicitta motivation you generated earlier today, and really try your best to make sure that your motivation for being here, participating in this class, is to be of benefit to all other sentient beings. So the best way we can benefit them is by developing our potential for enlightenment, our Buddha nature, becoming enlightened. And then we can work to help all living beings in the best possible way for all of time. And in the meantime, as we increase our knowledge and experience of the Dharma, we can be of benefit to other beings more and more from now up to enlightenment. I try to have that motivation as your reason for listening and joining in this class. So I thought it would be nice to do a meditation on something that we looked at last week, for misconceptions that we have about true sufferings, such as our body. So just look at those in a bit more depth and see if we can recognize that misconception in our mind. Let's start with a few minutes of meditation on the breathing. That was the very first practice we learned about with regard to the mindfulness of the body, being aware of the breathing coming in and going out. So do that for a few minutes to help your mind settle down, be more clear and concentrated. So, the first of the four misconceptions is thinking that impermanent things are permanent. So, our body and all the people and all the things we see in the world around us are impermanent. That's just a fact. That's their nature. They're changing all the time and they won't last forever. So that's the reality of things, but we may see things in the opposite way, as if they are not impermanent and as if they were impermanent, as if they were permanent. So, one way we could notice this with regard to our own body is when some kind of change happens in our body, when we get sick or we notice a sign of aging, wrinkles, gray hair, or something not working very well as it used to. If we feel surprised by this, upset by this, like, why does this have to happen? So that kind of reaction shows that we don't really see our body as impermanent, but instead as permanent. We expect it to last and to stay the same. So just check if you've ever had that kind of reaction. So just contemplate that it is the nature of the body to be impermanent, to change. It's changing every moment, every millisecond, so every tiny moment of time. Changes are taking place in our body. So inevitably, our body is aging, changing, getting older, getting more susceptible to illness and other kinds of degeneration. And just contemplate that. See if you can accept that, become comfortable with it. And then the second misconception with regard to our body is thinking that it's satisfying, pleasurable, a source of real happiness. So we might notice this if we have happy feelings, pleasurable feelings when using our body for something that's fun, enjoyable, like running or yoga, hiking, dancing, and so on. So try to recall having that kind of experience of seeing your body as something really pleasurable, a source of happiness and pleasure. So, this is a misconception because the reality of our body is that it's in the nature of dukkha, sometimes called suffering, but we could also call it unsatisfactoriness. Later, we'll look at different examples of the unsatisfactory experiences we have with our body. But there are moments of pleasure, but those moments don't last. They quickly fade, disappear, vanish, and we encounter other kinds of experiences again and again, like physical pain and discomfort and sickness and hunger and thirst and on and on. So the list of unpleasant experiences we have with our body is very long. And whatever pleasure we have is very short term and not truly satisfying. Doesn't last, doesn't remove our suffering. So then the third misconception with respect to our body is regarding it as attractive. So see if you can recall feeling pleasure and even attraction when seeing yourself in the mirror, for example, especially when you're all dressed up, freshly showered and wearing nice fresh clothes and looking really nice. So do you have that sense of, oh, I'm really nice looking. This body is great looking, something like that? So this is a misconception because we're not looking carefully or deeply at the body. We're looking at just superficial aspects of the body. But underneath the skin, behind the eyeballs, what we find are things that aren't attractive at all. And in fact, we'd probably feel shocked and horrified and disgusted if we were to look at those. And even if we look carefully at the superficial aspects like the skin and the eyes and so on, as we talked about last week, if we look at those under a very powerful microscope and look at the different parts that they're made up of and so on, again, it's difficult to find anything that's really attractive. And the fourth misconception is thinking that the body has a self. So try to recall experiences where you had a feeling of a self, a real me, a real I, living somewhere inside the body and in the role of owner, the owner of the body, the controller of the body, the one making the body do different things. So this is a misconception because if we try to search for that kind of I that seems to be there, try to point to something within us that is that I, we have a hard time doing that. It seems to be there, but when we search for it, we analyze it, we look for it, then we can't find it and it even disappears. So as long as we have these four misconceptions in our mind and we don't check to see if they are true or not, if our body exists the way it appears or not, then they become the cause for continuing in samsara, cyclic existence. And so it's important for us to recognize these misconceptions and challenge them, check to see if they're true or not. And hopefully, if we do, we'll recognize they are wrong conceptions. They are seeing our body in an incorrect way. And that will help us to see our body in a more correct way, as impermanent, as not a source of genuine, lasting pleasure, as not really wonderful and attractive and clean and pure, and as not having a self, not being the home for a real independent self. So see if you can conclude the meditation by making the determination to continue contemplating these points and making your mind more and more familiar with them so that you can free your mind from these misconceptions. So, up to now, we've been learning about mindfulness with regard to the body, and there are a number of different practices associated with that. Mindfulness of breathing, body postures and actions, body parts, and elements, how the body is made of elements. There's a lot of material there to contemplate, to get more familiar with. And it's all for the purpose of helping us overcome various misconceptions and also afflictive emotions like attachment with regard to our body. That's probably the biggest one we have. Sometimes there's aversion. We may feel aversion to our body, but probably more common is attachment to our own body and also to the bodies of others. So that kind of attachment is one of the things that really keeps us stuck in samsara. And so these meditations help us decrease and eventually overcome that. And in the Sanskrit tradition, so far I've mainly been talking about the Theravada tradition, how these four establishments of mindfulness are practiced in that tradition. And later I'll talk about how they're practiced in the Sanskrit tradition. There's not so many differences, but a few differences. But one thing is, in the Sanskrit tradition, it's said that the four establishments of mindfulness are correlated with the four truths, what are sometimes called the Four Noble Truths or the Four Truths of Aryas. And so the first mindfulness, the mindfulness of the body, is correlated with the first truth, the truth of suffering or dukkha. So one way we can understand that is the body itself is an instance of true dukkha. It is a true suffering. So, as I mentioned before, when we hear the term true suffering or the truth of suffering, we might think of just suffering experiences, painful experiences. But, at least in the Sanskrit tradition, that term refers not just to feelings or experiences of suffering, but to things like our body and also the things in the world around us. All of these things come about as a result of contaminated karma and afflictions. So our body, the world, all the things in the world, all of these things can be traced to sentient beings' karma, contaminated karma, and also afflictions like ignorance, anger, attachment, and so forth. So it's those factors that bring about our body, the world, and so on. And so that's why they are all considered true sufferings or true dukkha. So because our body is a product, not of a divine creator, like many people believe, but it's the product of karma and afflictions. So those causes from which our body comes, those are faulty. Those are like contaminated things, faulty things. And since those are the causes of our body and the things in the world around us, then all these things themselves are faulty and not perfect and pure. But bound up with suffering and also the causes of suffering. So that's one way we can understand why our body is considered true suffering. But also, it's subject to the various types of suffering. Like in the Lamrim, there are these different lists of suffering, like the 8 types of suffering, and the 6 types of suffering, and the 3 types of suffering. You're probably familiar with all of those. So those experiences occur or happen on the basis of our body. Like among the 8 types of suffering, there's the suffering of birth, sickness, aging, death, and then meeting with undesired experiences and not getting what we want and separating from what we don't want to separate from. So all these are experienced on the basis of our body. So anyway, I'll talk more about that later when I get to the Sanskrit tradition and how they explain the 4 establishments of mindfulness. So tonight, I want to move on to the second of the 4 establishments of mindfulness, which is on feelings. Mindfulness of feelings. And this is correlated with the second noble truth, the true origins of suffering. So if we could have the slides. Okay, so mindfulness of feelings. So in English and possibly in other Western languages, we sometimes use the word feeling and emotion interchangeably. But in the context of Buddhism, they are not the same. Also, I have come to know that in like Western psychology, there's probably different views and different ways of explaining things in psychology. Not everyone agrees, but at least for some people, the way they use the term feelings and emotions is very different than the way they're used in Buddhism. So I was just looking up something today on the internet, and a number of explanations say that at least for some psychologists, they say that emotions come first. Emotions are the raw physiological reaction to some kind of stimulus, like bodily sensations, and they are sometimes unconscious. And then feelings come later. So emotions happen first, and then feelings come later. And feelings are more complex and involve thoughts and concepts, and they're usually on the conscious level. So it seems that that's totally the opposite to the way we use the terms in Buddhism. So if you have learned that system, then put that aside so that you can learn how we use these terms in Buddhism. So in Buddhism, we generally say feelings happen first, and then emotions happen later. So we use the English term feeling for one of the mental factors, one of the ever-present mental factors. There's 5 ever-present or omnipresent mental factors. One of those is feeling. And in Sanskrit, it's Vedana. Tibetan, it's Tsorwa. And so this particular mental factor, its function, what it does is to experience its object. So it's all ever present means it's there with every single experience that we have. When we see something, or we hear a sound, or we smell an odor, we taste a taste, we feel some sensation in our body, or we have a mental experience, like a thought or a memory or a dream or a fantasy. So with any of our 6 types of experience, 6 types of consciousness, there is always a feeling accompanying it. And the function of the feeling is to experience the object. And there's 3 types of feelings: pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. So, so accompanying every single one of our 6 consciousnesses, there's a feeling, and it's either a pleasant feeling or an unpleasant feeling or a neutral feeling. So that means is when we see an object, simultaneous with the visual perception of that object will be a feeling. So if the object is something we find pleasant, attractive, likable, then there'll be a pleasant feeling. But if it's an object we find unpleasant, unattractive, unlikable, then there's an unpleasant feeling. And then neutral, the 3rd type of feeling, is said to be neither pleasant nor unpleasant. So that's kind of more difficult to detect. But one thing I read said that we can guess. If we're not feeling pleasant and we're not feeling unpleasant, then it's probably a neutral feeling. So process of elimination. Yeah. So that's basically what feeling is. So it's there every single moment with every single one of our experiences of all the 6 types of experiences: seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, bodily sensation, and the mental experiences. So a little later, we'll do a meditation to see if we can become more aware of our feelings. We probably are aware of really strong feelings. If we have a strong, pleasant feeling, then yeah, we know that. Or a strong, unpleasant feeling, then we recognize that. But there's probably a lot that we don't notice, because if you think about it, it's happening like constantly, every nanosecond, every fraction of a moment. So it'd be difficult to notice every single one of our feelings. But with time, with practice, training the mind with mindfulness of feelings, then we can become more aware of them. And why do we need to do this? So feeling is actually a very important mental factor because it plays a role in the increase of afflictions. So here's where we have the term emotion. We use the word affliction, but we could also say afflictive emotions. Yeah. So the way it works is, so on the slide it says, in ordinary beings, pleasant feelings can increase attachment. So I specified ordinary beings because Buddhas have feelings, arhats have feelings. Yeah. So you don't stop having feelings when you become a Buddha or you would attain nirvana. It's an ever-present mental factor for them too. It doesn't go away, it doesn't stop. But they wouldn't have any suffering feelings, any painful feelings, only pleasant feelings. I don't know about neutral. But for them, for a Buddha or an arhat, a pleasant feeling will not increase attachment because they have eliminated attachment. But for those of us who haven't eliminated attachment, who still have the seeds of attachment, the tendency to have attachment, then when we have a pleasant feeling, it can, not always, that's why I put can, it can increase our attachment. So I think that's pretty easy to recognize. When we have a pleasant feeling about something we see or hear or smell or taste or touch, then almost immediately there's this wish to continue having that feeling. We like that feeling. I mean, it feels good. And so we get attached to the object and we want to possess that object or just continue to experience it. So we might notice this when we're in a shopping mall or seeing ads on TV or on the internet. We see something attractive and, it attracts our attention. There's a pleasant feeling and very quickly, I want that. So sometimes if you have mindfulness and introspective awareness, you can notice this happening. It's so fast. It's like lightning. I want it. And another thing is, it seems that our mind thinks that the pleasure is coming from the object. Yeah. Have you ever noticed that? It's like that object gives me this pleasant feeling. And that's why we get attached to it. We want that pleasant feeling and we think, yeah, if I can have that object, own it, have it around as much as possible, then I keep having that pleasant feeling. So maybe that's the second of the 4 misconceptions that we just meditated on. The second misconception is thinking that this object is a source of pleasure, when in fact it's another example of dukkha. It's a type of true suffering, true dukkha. So one way we can check, if the object really is the source of pleasure, if the object itself was truly pleasurable, then everyone else would get pleasure from it as well. But usually that's not the case. You've probably had many experiences of, getting really excited about some object and talking about it with somebody and they say, ooh, you like that? Ooh. Or just noticing, that people don't get excited the same way you do. So what's pleasurable for one person isn't for somebody else, and it could be unpleasant, right? Definitely there are people who find your pleasurable object unpleasant. Also, even in our own experience, if the object itself was truly pleasurable, we should always get pleasure from it. But if you check carefully, that isn't always the case. Like a certain type of food, if you really, enjoy eating that food, but if you kept eating that food 3 times a day, day after day, day after day after day, would it continue to give you pleasure? I remember meeting somebody once who he had attachment to a certain kind of candy and he wanted to get over this attachment. So he just gorged himself on it and got to the point where he just felt, oh, I can't eat any more of that. So that really stopped his attachment. I don't know if you need to do that. There are other ways, but it just shows, that if the object itself was the source of pleasure, that it should continue to give pleasure. But if you try that kind of experiment, or the song, if there's a certain song you like to listen to, but if you kept playing it again and again and again and again, would it continue to be enjoyable? No way. So that shows that it isn't the object, but rather the pleasant feeling is something that comes up with it. We're going to look later at what are the causes of different kinds of feelings coming up. So I think we could say that the object is a condition, but it isn't the main cause for the pleasant experience. And then, so yeah, if we're not careful, then when we have a pleasant feeling, that can increase attachment. And hopefully you know that attachment isn't a healthy state of mind. It's one of the main afflictions keeping us in samsara. has lots of adverse consequences, lots of disadvantages. And so it's something we need to overcome to be free of samsara and become Buddha. And then unpleasant feelings can increase aversion or hatred, that whole range of emotions, negative emotions like anger, hatred. It could even lead to violence and aggression. So that should also be easy to recognize, just looking at our experiences. When we have an unpleasant feeling with regard to an object, then there's this feeling of wanting to separate from it. I want to get away from that, to avoid it. And we may even go so far as to want to destroy the object, harm the object. So again, in this kind of situation, our mind sees the object as being the cause of the unpleasant feeling. Is that true? Well, I was thinking about, if somebody has a lit cigarette or incense stick and they're putting it on the skin, on our skin, it certainly does seem as if that object is the cause of the pain, the unpleasant feeling. The pain is coming from the object. But then I was thinking, not everybody does feel pain. Not everybody would feel pain. If they had a lit cigarette stuck to their arm. For example, Arya Bodhisattvas, it said that Arya Bodhisattvas, these are bodhisattvas who've attained the direct realization of emptiness. So because of that realization and because of their bodhicitta, they no longer experience pain. So even if they're cut or burned, there's no pain. But not even such exalted beings, but even ordinary people. There are ordinary people who don't have pain. For example, there's something called congenital insensitivity to pain. And so this is from birth. Some people have that. They just never experience any pain. So that might sound great, but it has its downside, because then they can have a wound and they don't feel any pain for it, so that it goes untreated. And also lepers have this problem. People suffering from leprosy. I've heard this. I don't know if it's completely true or not, but they don't feel pain, and they sometimes put their hands or their limbs close to fire, because the heat from the fire gives them some relief from the discomfort of the leprosy. I don't know what they feel, some kind of itchiness. And they don't feel the pain when their fingers are in the fire. So they get burned. And that's actually how they lose their, like their fingers and their toes and so on. I don't know if that's true or not. This is what I've heard. But yeah, so it can actually be problematic to not feel pain. But anyway, there are people, because of various conditions in their body or in their mind. Apparently also some people just have a very strong mind or something going on in their mind, such that even if they are aware of pain, but it doesn't bother them. They're not bothered by it, so they can kind of put up with it. So not everyone then reacts in the same way to the same kind of stimulus. Like, it's kind of an extreme example of lit cigarette or a sharp object like a needle or a knife. So then it's a condition. We could say that object is a condition, but the real cause, the main cause for the feeling, the unpleasant feeling of pain, would be within our own mind. So anyway, otherwise, unpleasant feelings that we have, if we're not careful, they can increase this mental state of anger, aversion, hatred, hostility, and so on. And then neutral feelings, the third type of feeling, is said to increase ignorance. So that is more difficult to understand, but in the text they say that because our mind doesn't see things in a realistic way, for example, that misconception about seeing impermanent things as permanent. So that's one of the misconceptions that clouds our mind. So things are actually impermanent, but we see them as permanent. And also, things are empty of inherent existence, but we see them as inherently existing. So we have these misconceptions about phenomena. And then when we have just a neutral feeling about an object, we just continue to go along with the way that it appears as permanent rather than impermanent, or as inherently existing rather than empty of inherent existence. And so our ignorance and our misconceptions are not counteracted, but are just perpetuated. They just continue. So Bhikkhu Anulayo, who did I think it was actually his PhD thesis on the Satipatthana Sutra, the Four Foundations of Mindfulness. So there's a book called The Direct Path to Enlightenment. So it's very, very thorough in its analysis of all the four establishments of mindfulness. So in his book, he says, developing understanding and detachment in regard to these three feelings has the potential to lead to freedom from dukkha, from suffering. Thus, to contemplate feelings means quite literally to know how one feels. How do you feel? And to do this with such immediacy that the light of awareness is present before the onset of reactions, projections, or justifications in regard to how one feels. Undertaken in this way, contemplation of feelings will reveal the surprising degree to which one's attitudes and reactions are based on this initial affective input provided by feelings. So in other words, the idea in practicing mindfulness of feelings is to notice them, to be aware of them, and then to stop the process of them becoming or leading to these afflictions of attachment, aversion, and ignorance. So that's not easy to do, but with time, with practice, it does become easier. And even if these afflictive emotions do arise, because they happen so fast, but we'll be more likely to notice them and be able to stop them from going further. So just having greater mindfulness of this whole process will be very helpful in avoiding the increase of afflictions and also acting out the afflictions and creating negative karma. So the next slide contains the words of the Buddha from the sutra, the Satipatthana Sutra, explaining how to practice. So it's pretty simple. It says, when feeling a pleasant feeling, one knows, I feel a pleasant feeling. When feeling an unpleasant feeling, one knows, I feel an unpleasant feeling. When feeling a neutral feeling, one knows, I feel a neutral feeling. So probably initially we would need to practice this in meditation. Harder to start practicing it when you're busy and doing lots of things and not able to pay full attention to what's happening in your mind. But then if we do get experience of it during meditation, it will be easier during our life to at least notice the coarse, gross feelings that we have. Like when we see or smell or taste something that's really wonderful or really disgusting, to notice a pleasant or unpleasant feeling. And we can just say to ourselves, this is a pleasant feeling or this is an unpleasant feeling. And part of the practice is also to recognize that feelings are impermanent, just like every other part of our body and mind, our aggregates. They only last a moment, then pass. So again, Bhikkhu Analayo says, a prominent characteristic of feelings is their ephemeral nature. Sustained contemplation of this ephemeral and impermanent nature of feelings can then become a powerful tool for developing disenchantment with them. A detached attitude towards feelings, owing to awareness of their impermanent nature, is characteristic of the experiences of an arhat. Well, that's a long way off, but to become an arhat, the person who became an arhat most probably did do this practice to start with awareness of their feelings and the impermanent nature of their feelings. Yeah, so recognizing how impermanent they are, how momentary they are, will help us to be less caught up in them, taking them seriously, and less affected by them, bothered by them, and be able to let go of them without reacting further. So let's do a little meditation on this. See if we can become more aware of our feelings. So as before, start by being aware of the breath, breathing coming in and going out. And that will help your mind to settle down, calm down, become more clear. Now think back over your day today. Go back to when you first woke up this morning. And then just move forward from there up until the present. And just see if you can recall the feelings that you had when seeing things or hearing sounds and so on, different kinds of sense perceptions that you had, and also mental experiences, thoughts, memories, and so on. Just try to remember as many of the feelings that accompanied those experiences that as you can. Pleasant feelings when perceiving something attractive, unpleasant feelings when perceiving or thinking of something unattractive. Neutral is more difficult, but you might be able to recall some neutral feelings during the day. So just try to remember as many as you can. Now, just be aware of the present moment, what's happening in the present moment, moment by moment. So you have your eyes closed, you will see things, but you probably hear sounds, maybe smell odors, maybe have a taste in your mouth, bodily sensations, thoughts, memories popping up in your mind. So just allow these experiences to occur and see if you can notice the feeling accompanying each of these experiences, or as many as you can. Again, difficult to notice every single feeling, but try to notice as many as you can. And also see if you can notice attachment arising after a pleasant feeling, or aversion arising after an unpleasant feeling. So I was thinking we could be kind of adventurous and creative and do experiments. Like, for example, just sitting quietly in a room and then just looking around the room and just trying to notice different feelings arise when we see different objects. So some objects might have a pleasant feeling, others an unpleasant feeling. Or doing it outside, looking out at a landscape. So that would be an experiment that might help to be more aware of feelings. Or with the sense of touch, touching different objects. I think people generally like touching things that are soft, like cashmere, cotton, or smooth, like well-polished wood or marble. But then when it comes to things like sandpaper or burlap, really rough material, I don't think we find that kind of sensation pleasant. But yeah, just to try touching different things and then seeing what kind of reaction comes up. So that would be helpful to become more aware, more mindful of feelings. So I was the last couple of days to prepare for this, I was kind of doing research on feelings, different texts, what they say about feelings. And so I came up with different divisions of feelings. So the next slide. So feelings is, kind of a big group or category of experiences, this type of mental factor. And so there are these different ways of dividing feelings. And looking at these might make your head spin. It might make feelings much more complicated than you would like. But on the positive side, looking at the different divisions of feelings can help us get a better understanding of that particular mental factor, looking at it from different points of view. So if you find this helpful, you can contemplate it. Otherwise, you can ignore it. So the first, there's a twofold division of feelings into physical feelings and mental feelings. So when we come across the term physical feelings, we'll probably think, oh, that's a feeling in the body, a sensation in the body. But it's not quite like that. The term physical feelings are those that accompany a sense consciousness. So that we have 5 types of sense consciousnesses: seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and tactile or body consciousness. So all 5 of those, the feelings that accompany all 5 of those, are called physical feelings. And the reason they're called that is because those feelings depend on a physical sense power. Like to be able to see and have a feeling about what we see depends on the eye faculty, which is, yeah, it's kind of complicated in Buddhism. They say there's 2 things. There's the gross eye, which I'll call the eye organ, the eye that we can see. But Buddhism says within the eye, there's another kind of very subtle form, which is actually the eye faculty or the sense power. And that is what enables seeing to take place. So as long as that is there and it's functioning properly, we will be able to see things. But if it's damaged or absent or whatever, we won't be able to see. So that's why people are blind. They can have an eye, but still not be able to see if that eye sense power is missing or damaged. So anyway, it's a physical thing. So the eye organ and the eye sense power are physical, material. And since having the experience of seeing an object and then feeling pleasant or unpleasant with regard to that object, since it's dependent on this physical sense power, that's why those feelings are called physical feelings. Does that make sense? And then mental feelings are those that accompany the mental consciousness. So mental consciousness includes memories. So, we have lots of memories, and also thoughts, thinking about things. And when we, think about the future, make plans and fantasize what we want to happen in the future and so on. So all of those are part of the mental consciousness. And so feelings that accompany those are mental feelings. So when we have memories, this often happens, I don't know about you, but when I'm doing meditation, all these memories are popping up. And some of them may be pleasant memories, nice things that happened in the past. So then there's a pleasant feeling that accompanies those. But some are unpleasant feelings, bad things that happened in the past. So when those pop up, there's probably an unpleasant feeling with those. So these are things we can notice when we're meditating. So that's one way of dividing feelings, whether they're so-called physical related, whether sense consciousnesses, sense perceptions, or mental, just related with the mental experiences. And then there's this 5-fold division. This is found in Vasubandhu's text, Treasury of Knowledge, Abhidharma Kosha. So it's just it's basically taking that 2-fold division and expanding it. So the 5-fold division are physical happiness and physical suffering. So that means, again, physical meaning related to our senses, our 5 senses. So with any of our 5 senses, we can have happiness, which basically means a pleasant sensation, a pleasant feeling. So that's physical happiness. And then physical suffering would be an unpleasant experience that occurs with any of our 5 sense consciousnesses. And then the next 2 are mental feelings of happiness and unhappiness. So with our thoughts and our memories, if we have a pleasant feeling, that's mental happiness. If we have an unpleasant feeling, that's mental unhappiness. And then the 5th is just he calls it equanimity, but it's neutral feeling, neither pleasant nor unpleasant. And that one isn't divided into physical and mental. I don't know why. It's just left as one. So this is, like I say, in Vasubandhu's text, there's this 5-fold division, although it is said that the 5 can be condensed into 3, the usual 3 of happiness or pleasure, unhappiness or unpleasant feelings, and then neutral feelings. And in the Low-Rig text and some other texts, it mentions 18 types of feelings. Can anyone guess 18 types of feelings?
The 3 of pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral associated with each of the 6 consciousnesses.
Right. So each of the 6 consciousnesses can have a pleasant or an unpleasant or a neutral feeling. So 6 times 3 is 18. So you might think, well, what's the point of that? But like I say, it can be helpful, to think that, for example, when we see objects, our visual perception, we're seeing things all the time, as long as we have our eyes open and there's light and we can see. So we have lots of those types of experiences of visual perception of objects. And so with our vision, with our visual perceptions, we can have there can be a pleasant feeling, an unpleasant feeling, and a neutral feeling. And one of those is always there, always accompanying every single one of our visual perceptions. So I don't know, I find it quite amazing to think about. Feelings is very wide in range. Okay, so the next slide is looking at causes of feelings. So what is the cause of having a pleasant feeling or an unpleasant feeling or a neutral feeling? So here's a verse from Nagarjuna's Precious Garland that says, "From non-virtue comes all sufferings, and likewise all bad migrations, being born in unfortunate realms. From virtue comes all happy migrations and the happiness within all rebirths." So this is one way of explaining the causes of feelings. Pleasant feelings, when we have pleasant feelings, they are the result of virtue. So in past lives, or maybe in this life, creating virtue, then that virtue, one way that virtue ripens is as pleasant feelings. And unpleasant feelings are the result of non-virtue. So having created non-virtuous karma, killing, stealing, and so on, then that ripens as unpleasant feelings. So in the Lamrim Chenmo, Lama Tsongkhapa says, the manner in which actions, in other words, karma, are definite is as follows. Regardless of whether we are ordinary beings or Aryas, all happiness in the aspect of pleasant feelings, even as slight as feeling a cool breeze when you're born in hell, arises from virtuous actions accumulated in the past. Happiness cannot arise from a non-virtuous action. Also, all suffering in the aspect of painful feelings, even as slight as that produced in the mental continuum of a foe destroyer, arises from non-virtue accumulated in the past. Suffering cannot arise from a virtuous action. So he seems to be saying that arhats can have painful feelings. I would have thought, yeah, okay. So maybe that's true. Arhats can still have unpleasant feelings, but I'm sure not Buddhas. I'm sure Buddhas are beyond that, but maybe arhats can still have tiny unpleasant feelings. That's what he's saying here. So anyway, that's the point, that karma, virtuous karma, non-virtuous karma, is the cause for the feelings that we have. And so learning that, contemplating that, can help us turn away from creating non-virtuous actions like the 10 non-virtues. Then we won't have unpleasant feelings, and to do what's virtuous, because that's what brings the pleasant feelings, the happy feelings that we want. But then I was thinking, I thought about like bullies. Yeah, bullies seem to get pleasure from making others suffer, or people who commit torture, right? So there do seem to be cases of people who do nasty things, cause suffering to others, and feel good about it. They have a pleasant feeling about it. So I was thinking, well, how do you explain that? Are those pleasant feelings the result of virtue they created? And certainly not the result of what they're doing now. That's non-virtue, but virtue they created in the past, and it's ripening at that moment as pleasant feelings. So we have two geshis here right now, and I'm sitting at the same lunch table with them. So I tried to ask this question to them. And so one of the geshis, Geshe Yeshi, he immediately said that karma is not the only cause of feelings, but another cause is conceptions that we have. And then he started talking about something else. But today I asked him again, and I asked him, I gave an example of a possible, how that could possibly work. I said, if someone, let's say somebody really likes another person, they have attachment for another person, and they have all these ideas about how wonderful that person is, how great that person is. You know, it happens when we have attachment for somebody. And so as a result of those conceptions, then when we see that person, we have a pleasant feeling, or think about that person, we have a pleasant feeling. So would that be an example of what he was talking about? And he said, yes. So I was glad to hear that, because I thought, well, that makes sense. And also in the case of the bully, maybe that's also the reason they have an unpleasant feeling. I mean, I don't know why bullies like to bully, but maybe they get a sense of power or a feeling of adrenaline. I remember reading one person saying he got this adrenaline rush when he bullied other kids and got them to look scared and cry. And then he'd get this adrenaline rush, and then he got it addicted to that. So he kept doing it more and more. So anyway, there's, because of conceptions and maybe also because of physiological reactions, then there's a pleasant feeling. And they're not really aware of the suffering that they're causing, and lacking in compassion and so on. But anyway, there just seem to be conceptions involved in that affect that kind of feeling arise. And then I thought of another example, like those of us who have met the Buddha's teachings, and we know something about the Buddha and his teachings, and have experienced a lot of benefit from the Buddha and his teachings. So when we see an image of the Buddha, statue of the Buddha, or painting of the Buddha, or we think about the Buddha, we have a pleasant feeling. But there are people who would have an unpleasant feeling when they look at a Buddha statue, because maybe they think idol worship, or this is Satan, or I don't know, whatever people have in their mind, but it's possible. Yeah, people would feel angry and hostile and negative towards an image of the Buddha. So again, that's related to conceptions in the minds of people. So anyway, that's was interesting to learn that conceptions can also be a cause for feelings rather than only karma. Another cause of feelings is contact. So in the 12 links, let's see, I think feeling is number 7 of the 12 links. And right before feeling is contact. Contact is number 6. And contact is also a mental factor. It's one that I always found a bit puzzling, hard to understand. But they say it's the mental factor that brings together 3 things: the object, sense power, and consciousness or mind. So when those 3 things come together, then one has a perception of an object. One perceives the object and immediately has a feeling about the object. So like this mala, this prayer beads, that's the object. And I have to have a functioning sense power, eye sense power, to be able to see it. And consciousness that is able to perceive. So when those 3 things come together, the object, sense power, and consciousness, then I can have the perception, visual perception of the mala. And immediately or simultaneous with that would be a pleasant, well, I would have a pleasant feeling because this is my mala. I use it to recite prayers, mantras. So I have a pleasant feeling, but again, somebody else might perceive it and have an unpleasant feeling for whatever reason. So anyway, contact is said to be the mental factor that brings together those 3 things so that we can have a perception of seeing or hearing or smelling or tasting or bodily contact, bodily experience. So contact is another of the causes of feelings that has to happen right before feeling occurs. Okay, so then some more types of feelings in the next slide. So this is going back to the sutra, the Satipatthana Sutra. So we already looked at his words about how to just notice if there's a pleasant feeling, an unpleasant feeling, and a neutral feeling. So following that, the Buddha talks about noticing worldly and unworldly feelings. So there seem to be different ways of explaining the difference between a worldly feeling and an unworldly feeling. So in the book found Following the Buddha's Footsteps, it says that worldly feelings arise from contact with sense objects, so sense perceptions, and unworldly or spiritual feelings arise when we practice the Dharma and we're aligning our minds with the Dharma. And Bhikkhu Analayo in his book says the distinction between worldly and unworldly feelings is concerned with the difference between feelings related to the flesh. Maybe that's the Pali term, but yeah, it sounds more like physical feelings, which we already learned were related to our sense perceptions. And then feelings related to renunciation. This additional dimension revolves around an evaluation of feeling that is based not on its affective nature, but on the ethical context of its arising. The basic point introduced here is awareness of whether a particular feeling is related to progress on the path or regress on the path. So let's look at some examples that should help us to understand better the difference between these. So worldly feelings are basically what us ordinary beings experience. So a painful worldly feeling, example, when we see something ugly, or we hear an unpleasant sound. So with any of our five senses, just encountering something that's unpleasant, then that would be a painful worldly feeling. And then pleasant worldly feeling is when we hear something like hearing nice music or seeing something attractive or tasting delicious food. Again, just our ordinary sense perceptions. When they encounter something we like, then there's a pleasant feeling. And neutral feeling, I just thought of an example of seeing a telephone pole, because I assume most people find telephone poles neither attractive nor unattractive. There could be people who like them or don't like them, but for me, I hardly even notice them. They're just all over the place, and you hardly even notice that they're there. So I think in my case, I have just a neutral feeling when I see a telephone pole. Yeah. So worldly feelings are pretty easy to understand. And then the unworldly or spiritual feelings, they could also be painful or unpleasant, pleasant and neutral. So an example of a painful or an unpleasant spiritual feeling would be sadness when meditating on death. Okay, so there could be lots of examples of meditations that we do that could invoke a feeling of sadness, at least in the beginning. Like, we don't really feel too happy when we first meditate on death. It's usually a topic most people want to avoid and not think about. And it's of course something we don't want to happen to us. So all those kind of things can come up when we meditate on death. So we may have unhappy feelings, sad feelings when doing meditation on death, or when we meditate on the different kinds of suffering, dukkha of samsara, the 8 types of suffering, the 6 types of suffering. So there's probably an unpleasant feeling that accompanies that. And that would be a mental feeling, I think, a feeling in the mind rather than with any of our 5 senses. But because what we're doing, meditating on death or meditating on dukkha, is part of the practice. It's part of our spiritual practice that will help us to get out of suffering, to get to nirvana, to enlightenment. So then it's beneficial. So even if it's an unpleasant feeling, it's worthwhile. It's meaningful. It's beneficial. Maybe some other examples might be when we remember some non-virtuous action that we did and feel regret for that. So there's probably an unpleasant feeling, an unhappy feeling at that time, but that's a healthy, positive kind of unhappy feeling, because it will motivate us to purify and then really try our best to not repeat that action again and do the opposite kind of action instead. Okay, so then pleasant unworldly feelings. Unworldly spiritual feelings. An example would be joy when meditating on loving kindness. So some meditations that we do are very uplifting, like when we meditate on loving kindness or meditate on the Buddha or our spiritual teacher or Buddha nature, the possibility of attaining enlightenment, the possibility of getting rid of all our afflictions and our suffering and so on. So when meditating on those, then there's hopefully a joyful feeling, a happy feeling, a pleasant feeling. But that's very different than the happiness we feel when we listen to music or eat some delicious food, or yeah, because there's greater danger of attachment arising. And then for neutral spiritual feelings, the example is the feeling of equanimity. But this term equanimity is a bit complicated. It can mean different things. So in the book, Following in the Buddha's Footsteps, this feeling of equanimity was said to be the feeling of beings and who have attained the fourth jhana, the fourth concentration. So up until then, like in the first three jhanas, there's still some degree of happiness, but the meditator comes to feel that happiness is kind of agitating to the mind. The mind isn't very calm, and so they long for a more calm and stable state of mind. So in the fourth jhana, the feeling they have is equanimity, which is quite different than what we, like a neutral feeling that we might have, because they have super strong concentration and stability. But anyway, that's an example of a spiritual neutral feeling. I'm not sure of other examples. That's the only one I could find, but I'll look for others. Maybe when practicing calm abiding, when doing calm abiding practice, you may also have a feeling that's kind of more calm, not really happy, not miserable, but more calm. So that might be another example of a neutral feeling. It's on the spiritual side. Can anyone think of other examples of painful or pleasant or neutral spiritual feelings?
For pleasant, I would think being at a teaching where maybe you finally get something that you've been trying to understand, or it really brings the subject to your mind, and it's very pleasant.
An aha moment. Yeah. Yeah, there can be lots of pleasant feelings in our spiritual practice. Just becoming more kind, more humble, more patient, and so on. So those kind of experiences are, yeah, the pleasant feeling, having those. Generosity, giving. We had a teaching today about the joy a bodhisattva feels when they give, and so we can get a little taste of that as well. When you give and see the joy of the other person, the gratitude of the other person, then that can be a sense of joy. Yeah, so lots of experiences. Anybody online want to say something?
Venerable, I think Rachel Raya would like to say something.
Yes, I don't see her on the screen. Rachel?
Go ahead, whoever has their hand up.
Hello, of course it's me.
Oh, Rashika, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was going to try to spice it up tonight and not say anything, but silence isn't a skill I've developed to its fullest potential. But I was thinking, when you talk about pleasurable spiritual feelings, could like gratitude be one? Because like when I was in Taiwan, it was like hundreds of steps, and every 3 steps we prostrate and we just think about all the things we're grateful for, and it just brought me to tears. But I was crying, but I was happy because I just realized all the kindness I have received from everyone. So would that be considered like spiritual happiness, I guess?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, we do lots of practice to think about the kindness of others, the kindness of our teachers, the kindness of our parents, and so on. So that's a whole practice. Yeah, very joyful. It can bring tears to the eyes. Yeah. One of the best ways to cultivate loving kindness and the wish to help others is awareness of their kindness. No payment.
So thinking of when you do your Nundro 100,000 prostrations, and it's really painful as you at somewhere in the middle when the body hasn't gotten used to it, and but you have gotten to a place where you're doing maybe a few thousand a day, so that could be unpleasant, and yet it's the fact that you're doing Nundro and visualizing, and that could be pleasant. So it could be either, depending on the state of the mind.
I mean, most of the examples of these spiritual feelings, they seem to be mental rather than physical. So the physical discomfort one has when doing prostrations, I'm not sure if that would be considered a spiritual feeling. It could be, but if you have this mental thought that I'm purifying, I can put up with this discomfort. I can bear this discomfort. It's worthwhile because I'm purifying my karma and so on. So there could still be a pleasant mental feeling, even if the body is suffering. Yeah. So yeah, I'm just not sure if that physical suffering, the body suffering, would be considered a spiritual feeling. Like I say, most of these examples of spiritual feelings seem to be more on the mental level. But it's worthwhile. I mean, they do say it's worthwhile going through physical difficulties in Dharma practice. That itself is purification. Yeah, I think we can't expect to get enlightened and never have any physical discomfort. And look at what the Buddha did, what he put up with. And Milarepa and so on. So let's see. I have more material. Maybe we can try to go on a little bit and get just the next slide. So I don't know if you ever wondered about this, but we have 5 aggregates, and feeling and discrimination, although they are mental factors, they're separated out into, they have a whole aggregate to themselves. And then all the other mental factors are lumped together in aggregate number 4. So I used to wonder about that. And then the answer is provided in Vasubandhu's Abhidharma Kosha, Treasury of Knowledge. And so he gives 3 reasons why feeling and discrimination are separate aggregates. So the first reason is because of being the roots of arguments. And also, this is talking about contaminated feelings, not feelings in the mind of a Buddha or an Arhat. So ordinary beings, sentient beings, contaminated feelings. So they can be the roots of arguments. And there's a sutra that says, due to the cause that is attachment to the desirable, kings argue with kings, farmers with farmers, and householders with householders. And due to the cause that is attachment to views, the ordained argue with the ordained. So just to explain that. So for ordinary people, lay people, for example, feelings are the basis of arguments, because ordinary people get attached to their things, like their land, their water, their house, their car, their family, relatives, and so on. So people have attachment to their things. And this attachment leads to feelings of happiness. When everything is just the way we want it to be, we feel happy. But if something goes wrong, or somebody tries to steal or damage any of our things, then that leads to feelings of unhappiness. And so these feelings in turn can lead to arguments. So, for example, within a family or within a relationship, then if we look at why there are conflicts, why there are arguments, then we can probably trace it to feelings. And also arguments between families or other groups of people, countries, and so on, football fans, political groups, and so on. So again, it could be related to feelings. So I was thinking the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a good example of this, because each of these two groups has very strong feelings about certain parts of land. And so some people feel very strongly, this land belongs to us because God said so. God, ancient times, ancient texts, God said, this is our land, this belongs to us. But the other group says, no, but we've been living here for the last few centuries. So it's our land. Our ancestors lived here, our grandparents, our great-grandparents, they lived here, they farmed this land. So people have very strong feelings about the land and want to have rights to it. And I was thinking another example, there was this tragedy that happened at a football game in Indonesia just a few days ago. And apparently it started when thousands of fans rushed onto the field after their home team lost a game. So there was this game between two football, I guess they were rivals for a long time, these two football teams. And the home team lost the game, and thousands of the fans just rushed into the field, and then the police started firing tear gas into the crowd, and the crowd had a stampede trying to get away through narrow exits. And so in the end, there were 125 people who were killed, including some small children, many others injured. So I think that's probably related to feelings. My guess is the fans were upset, had unhappy feelings that their team lost the game. And I don't know what they were hoping to do by rushing into the field. Sometimes that happens, people just get carried away with the feelings and don't think carefully about what they're doing. And then just, and so that ended very, very tragically. And so, many of the conflicts and problems and wars and injustice and so much suffering can come as a result of feelings. So that's what happens with lay people. Lay people can get into arguments and conflicts because of feelings about things. But then with the sutra quote mentions the ordained people can get into arguments because of attachment to views. And so this is the mental factor of discrimination, the third, which is the third aggregate. So ordained people, but I think that could also include lay people and scholars and academics and philosophers and so on. So such people have certain views or assertions about things, like which phenomena are permanent and which are impermanent, if there's a self or a no self, if a certain type of behavior is virtuous or non-virtuous. So they can have views about these things, and then they can get very attached to their views and hostile to others who have opposing views. And so this can also turn into arguments, conflicts, and in some cases, war. Lots of wars fought on the basis of religious views. My views are right, they are wrong, and they are heretics, and they are infidels, and they should be killed, and so on. So the point is, because feelings can become a cause of argument among lay people, and discrimination can become a cause of arguments among monastics or religious people or philosophers and so on, then that's one reason why they're separated out as aggregates. They're important. So they're important mental factors. They're mental factors, but they're also aggregates, a whole aggregate to themselves because of that important role that they play. And so there's two other reasons, but I don't know, the slide disappeared. I didn't quite finish talking about that. But we're getting short of time. Okay, we'll just quickly do. So number 2, the second reason is they are the causes of cyclic existence. So as we have seen, especially feelings, that they can lead to afflictions, pleasant feelings leading to attachment, unpleasant feelings leading to anger and hostility. And then when our minds get taken over by those afflictions, we act out and engage in non-virtuous actions, which create the cause for more samsara, rebirth and suffering in samsara. And similar things can happen because of discrimination. Again, discrimination is more to do with views, ideas, conceptions, but many, we have misconceptions about things, thinking that things are permanent when in fact they're impermanent. And so on the basis of those misconceptions, then again, we may act in ways that perpetuate samsara. So, mistaken discrimination is the cause of samsara. The third reason is the reason for the sequence. And so this has to do with the order of the aggregates. So I don't know if you ever wondered about that. Why are they in that order? Form, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness. And so there's a number of reasons for that order. But one reason is in terms of coarseness and subtleness. In terms of being able to notice and identify and recognize. So form aggregate, that's really obvious. We can't miss that. The body, that's very easy to notice. And then feelings are somewhat more subtle than the body, but they're still relatively coarse. So that's why feelings comes number 2. Discriminations are more subtle, more hard to recognize. So that's why they're number 3. And then the other mental factors and consciousness are more subtle. So they're ranged in order of from coarseness to subtleness, being able to recognize them. So anyway, those are just some reasons about why feeling and discrimination are separate aggregates. So the point is they are both very, very important mental factors. They play a role in us being in samsara, remaining in samsara, but they also play a role in getting out of samsara. So if we know how to work with them, like developing mindfulness of our feelings and recognizing how they are impermanent, and really trying not to let them increase our afflictions, then they can become beneficial to help us free ourselves from samsara. Okay, so that's enough for tonight. There's more about feelings, but I'll leave it for next week. That's probably enough. I hope you don't feel overwhelmed. Do you feel overwhelmed? Can you feel overwhelmed? Is that a feeling? That's probably an emotion. Yeah. Yeah, in our language, we do talk about lots of different kinds of feelings. Heavy feeling, that's a heavy feeling. I suppose that's unpleasant. The type of unpleasant feeling. Feeling light. I feel light. That's probably a pleasant feeling. Heavy feeling after eating a big lunch. Anyway, so again, in our own language, at least English language, we use the term feeling for lots of different types of feelings, but in the context of Buddhism, there's just three types of feelings: pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. Although there could be variations in that, but yeah. So between now and next week, if you can, try to become more aware of your feelings as they arise. And of course, it's difficult to notice all of them, but just try to be aware as much as you can. And if you have the time and energy, you could just sit down and spend 5 or 10 minutes focusing on feelings, just trying to be aware of them as they're arising. And if you do that in meditation, it'll probably help to have a greater awareness of feelings during the day. Okay, so
Venerable, do you have time to take another question?
yeah, a few minutes.
It's written in the chat, or would you like me to read it out?
I can't see the chat. Yeah.
Okay. So Rashika asks, if non-virtuous actions are the cause of unpleasant feelings and virtuous actions are the cause of pleasurable feelings, what is the cause of neutral feelings? So that's the first part. And
I
is
don't know.
neutrality as a feeling necessary for mundane beings? Because if we were constantly experiencing pleasure or pain, it would be sensory overload.
That's a good point. Yeah, I haven't encountered an explanation for neutral feelings, but perhaps it's neutral karma. I mean, there is such a thing as neutral karma, although I think, yeah, that's not quite the term for it. But yeah, like sweeping the floor or brushing our teeth without a particularly virtuous or non-virtuous motivation. So those would be examples of neutral, neither virtuous nor non-virtuous. But there is not a lot of information about that kind of karma. They mainly talk about the virtuous and non-virtuous. Those are the things we need to pay attention to. But that's just my guess. But I don't know for sure. Okay, so let's conclude with the dedication of merit. So we've spent this time well, wisely, with good motivation, looking at Buddha's teachings on very important practice that will help us get free of samsara and help others to be free of samsara as well. So feel confident we did create virtue, merit, positive potential, positive energy. And now we share that with all other beings, for all of us to reach enlightenment, and also for the long lives of all our spiritual teachers. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Incomparably kind and supreme Tenzin Gyatso, the wish-fulfilling, wish-granting jewel, source of every benefit and happiness in this world, may you have a long life and all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels. Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
night.
Good night.